Welcome to another episode of the People Pulse podcast, where we delve deep into the difficulties of building a thriving workplace. Today, we're exploring the vital connection between internal communication and employee experience, uncovering actionable insights from an industry expert. The following is a conversation with Sivadas Radhakrishna, internal communications and employee experience professional with over 12 years of experience in strategic people initiatives, marketing, and communications. He worked across industries as aviation, entertainment, sports, automobile, and academia. A voracious writer, believer in sharing whatever he learns through his constant engagement with internal communications and employee experience community over LinkedIn, which recognize him as top voice in the internal communication space. Hi, Shivdas. Thank you for being with us today and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nina. It's a pleasure. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you. I'm looking forward to discussing all these interesting topics with you today. Can we start by, can you share a specific example where you've quantified the impact of internal communication, translating it into tangible ROI for your company?
Actually, it's a great question, Nina, because I would love to share an example in this case. I would jog my memory back to even before I was in internal communication. So before I moved into internal communication, I come from a marketing and comms, background. So I'm someone who learned how marketing and communications, how internal communications can impact, the customer experience bit of it. And that's how I kind of transformed my journey from dealing with customers to dealing with employees to create happier customers. So your question actually takes me back to one of the examples that I kind of engaged in one of my initial parts of my career. So at that point, I was working with car dealership kind of a company, a pretty big one back in India, and they had a very specific challenge on the customer front, and this kind of stitches how employees can impact the customer experience bit of it. So whenever we were delivering cars in that particular organization, we discovered that the parent company used to send a survey back to the employees where they could kind of mark, they were extremely satisfied, they were completely satisfied, or they were delighted with the experience with the dealership. And this response was directly tied to an incentive that used to come to the dealership if the customers marked them delighted. It was very interesting. If you look at the human psychology, we always like to mark one down. You would never mark delighted outright. And
That's true.
we observed that customers would mark, let's say, completely satisfied or extremely satisfied, whereas actually they were delighted. And the percentage of people who were marking delighted language somewhere like say about 40-45% of our customers. So there was a huge chunk of customers who were delighted, but just because of the psychological block were marking us, one down. And our sales executives were trying left, right, and center to kind of push this graph up, but it was impossible. So something that based on a collective discussion with our sales executive, we came up with an idea where at the delivery bay, we created like two baskets. Okay, kind of created an engagement with the customers. So we named both baskets as delighted and extremely satisfied. And above the delighted, we put a smiley with a very happy face. And in front of extremely satisfied, we put a smiley with a sad face. And through our
Interesting.
internal comms to our sales executives, we told them to engage with customers on this bit. So whenever the customer was taking the delivery of the cars, they used to hand over a soft ball to the customer and ask them to hoop it into one of these baskets. If they were delighted, into the delighted basket. If they were kind of extremely satisfied, into that basket, but with a sad smiley. We observed most of the customers started throwing the balls into, delighted section. Now, what our sales executive did based on the comms that we kind of send out to all these guys is they created that mental model within the customers that if I'm delighted, I mark delighted. And this converted the responses that the customers were giving to about 95-96% of people started saying delighted after that. So that was
Wow.
a huge incentive that was coming into the dealership from this specific example. So and this was one of my first interactions with this, how employees directly kind of impact customer experience. And from here I started kind of transforming my journey into how to deal with employees to create more happier customers kind of a thing. So this is something that I remembered with your question.
That's a very interesting example, and thank you for sharing. If I may add,
Yeah.
psychology definitely, I'd say, influences how people react by, just affecting their emotional state,
Very
biases,
much.
expectations, right?
Yes.
And also, how questions are framed. All
Yeah.
these factors like social pressure, mood, or cognitive biases can lead customers to, rating their experiences more or less positively. So yeah, that's a very, very interesting example. Now, can you perhaps guide us through a systematic process that you've
Yeah.
utilized to construct a communication framework that
Okay.
authentically reflected your company's culture?
Very, very interesting framing of question, I would say, Nina. So, so there are a lot of frameworks actually, and I would say frameworks are very subjective to use in case to case basis.
True.
Maybe one kind of framework may not work in a specific example, whereas something else will work. Quickly, something that I can remember based on what you're asking is, and this is not something which I usually share, but it's always there in the back of my mind. So have you heard about the communication framework by the great Greek thinker Aristotle?
Okay.
So it's very simple actually. What Aristotle says is that in the communication framework he uses three parts. There is something called as ethos, which is like the speaker's degree of credibility when the person is speaking. There's something called as logos, which is the logic behind
Yes.
what you're trying to speak, and then there's something called as pathos, which is the ability of the speaker to form an emotional bond with whom you are interacting. Now, a lot of frameworks you would see with boxes which says you connect something to something and then you can achieve xyz kind of a thing, but this framework actually, if you kind of zoom out and you look at applying this framework across whatever you do. Take an example of a very big organization where you are from an internal comms department, and let's say you're very famous within the organization. Still, what's the number of people that you would probably interact directly with? It would be probably 500, maybe 1,000 if you're like exceptional. But let's take an example of an organization with 50,000 employees. What do you do then? Can you really go and interact with people? So when you are an internal comms department and you are sending out things, do you have that credibility among all the people who is reading these messages? Imagine someone who is sitting in a remote location in let's say Brazil, in Rio. Somebody is in Auckland, somebody is in London, Singapore. Are you really creating that connect? So what can we do here? You can create communication champions within those sections, who kind of echo your thought. So you have the logic. In the Aristotle's principle, you have the logic which is coming from the internal comms department, but the the ethos and pathos part can be bridged by a champion within that specific department, or
True.
or region. And an example that I can think of in this case is, imagine somebody who is working in finance in the month of March. Okay, the financial year end, people are
Mhm.
crazy with numbers, and you are crunching numbers. You're trying to match your PNLs and things like that. And then you have somebody in internal comms who comes and says, "Celebrate Women's Day" or "Celebrate XYZ." There's no connection. But imagine somebody from the finance department itself is speaking to the people within finance department and
True.
and echoing the message that internal comms is sending out. Then you create that channel where you match the ethos and pathos part of it, and you kind of have the emotional bond and credibility to amplify your messages. And it's something very simple that any organization can do. If you are a smaller organization, it's easier when with one or two internal comms people. But the moment your organization becomes larger, it becomes very difficult to bridge those emotional bond and credibility factor for internal comms people. So this is one easy framework anybody can implement.
True. I have to say, I love how you connect how you incorporate the ethos and the pathos with champions inside the company. And I couldn't agree more that champions add credibility and, just emotion to the
Yeah,
entire communication framework that we use, embodying the company values and, just
true.
inspiring each other with
Yeah.
their passion. Great. That's a wonderful example. And I also
Even
agree,
the culture part.
especially the culture part, and
Yes.
it's something that's easy to remember, and I think that it can
True.
resonate with literally every culture.
Yeah.
um can you share a scenario where some of the conventional best practices in internal communication fell short? So how did you pivot from a one size fits all approach to achieve success in this scenario?
I think instead of giving an example here, what I would do is I would probably look at a more general scenario because
Okay.
I would try to associate this with things that happen with everyone. And I'm pretty sure I've experienced this in some parts throughout my journey through. But if you look at, let's say, 80 to 90% of the internal comms community, what do they rely on today? You would have a digital platform like your traditional intranets or things like that through which you would
Mhm.
send messages. You would have probably emails. Again, it's something that is extensively used. You have town halls, which
Mhm.
they bring people together, and you have interactions and stuff, and you have newsletters. I
Mhm.
think if you look at these four channels, about 80 to 85% of internal comms population today would be using this four in some combination.
Mhm.
But you look at what happens here. Emails and traditional intranets, these are one-way communication channels
Mm.
where you are sending things out, but there's very limited capacity or capability to get feedback or for them to reply to you, the employees to reply to you. Okay. Town halls. Within smaller organization, it's probably easier. But the moment you have, let's say, 500 employees, 1,000 employees, it becomes very difficult to have these town halls in a way that matches everyone's time
Yeah.
slots.
Oh, of
It's
course.
even more it's even more logistical nightmare if you have offices across different time zones
Mm.
to organize the town hall. Okay. And the third thing with newsletters, every time you pick up a newsletter, it is more and more generic, or it is information that is probably which has happened and people are already aware of. This is the traditional methods that we have been using. Now,
Mm.
how can we pivot from here to make it more engaging? Something that I've noticed is a lot of corporate social media networks which are available, like
Mhm.
something which are forums, which are blog based, which have social features in it, which allows people to real time give comments, like things, react to the
Interact.
messages, interact to the messages that you're putting out. This becomes a major factor. You can help improve your engagement there. Town halls going virtual, you don't need to be physically present somewhere, but you can probably have it through your mobile phones or stuff like that. You can engage with them. And for newsletters, I would say shorten the newsletters and probably start sending them out department specific or role specific and things like that, and very quick. You don't need big 20-page newsletters. 1 2 pages, and probably
Of
weekly or
course.
monthly, which is more interactive. So I would say, as a community, we need to pivot to this kind of approaches where it's not
Mm.
Shivdas alone or Nina alone, but as a
Mm.
community, there has to be this pivot which has to happen within internal comms, where you need to start breaking down the information to smaller bite-sized things which people can easily consume. And also, we are dealing with a digital generation whose
Of course.
attention spans are very low.
Very low. Yeah.
You can't expect them to focus 1 hour in a town hall meeting and listen to everything that your CEO or your CHROs want to kind of send the message. It has to be more digestible. So I would say that's the pivot which is expected within the industry.
Yeah. Very well put. I would say bygone is the time where, as you yourself said, there's this all hands meeting where you have the CEO speaking for
Correct.
2 hours and everybody
Yeah.
listening carefully.
Yeah.
So I think that it's safe to say that we've entered the employee experience revolution
True. True.
space. And there's so many changes happening all the time. You've briefly mentioned something that I would like us to discuss a bit more. Perhaps maybe you can give us some strategic initiative that, from your experience, has notably improved the employee experience in your company.
Okay, so again, like when you speak of employee experience, right? One of the major factor that everyone needs to remember, and I kind of have this interactions with my fellow colleagues from other employee experience space and things like that. Something which is most important and the biggest factor that employee experience generating employee experience within any organization is your direct manager.
Mhm.
And until and unless employee experience or internal comms professionals can get into that space to engage managers, you can't really create that employee experience impact that you want to bring in, because your direct line manager has a huge impact on you. No matter how amazing your culture you want to project as or things like that, if your direct manager is not engaged or is not engaging enough, the employee experience within that specific team is gone. Now, something that I usually put forward, and this is a side joke, I would say. I usually put forward that almost all organizations should make their employees read a book, which I really love a lot. I'm sure you have heard about this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale
Mhm.
Carnegie.
Yeah,
That,
yeah, of course.
that's an outstanding book. And that brings me to the next topic, which is improving employee experience through appreciation. Okay. So one example that I can
Great
think of
example.
yeah, one example that I can think of is in one of my previous organizations, which was to do more with, entertainment space, where you would have people coming in and you have kids who would come in for, playing and stuff like that. And you had this people who would come in for, bowling space and things like that, those kind of a setup. What was happening there is that you had a lot of ground employees who were engaging with customers daily, but there was a disconnect between these employees, and the reason was everyone was feeling that they were doing great job, but
Mhm.
for some reason nobody was recognizing it, or there was no appreciation according to their perception. That appreciation component was very low. We did a very simple thing where we created a board which was like a shout out board for the employees, and we purposely placed it in an area where our CEO used to visit regularly. So
Mm.
so we suddenly noticed that there was a competition to appreciate each other among the
Amazing story.
employees. Yeah. And it automatically improved, their employee satisfaction levels, because now you were getting this dose of dopamine in terms of appreciation from your colleagues
Yes.
for every small thing that you were doing. And you also had this in the back of the mind that CEO is reading these things when coming. And there was no monetary benefit or anything like that, but just this small thing where you had this appreciation, given out to employees, you
Mm.
automatically improve their experience passively. This is the huge thing. Uh,
Of
Again,
course.
not my personal initiative or something, but something that I've seen which works in the industry. Flexibility for employees is huge. Uh,
Yes.
Organizations, I think, need to realize that employees have a life outside work. They have
Yeah,
things to do.
of
What
course.
happens if you have your kids who are falling sick in school? You have to go and pick them out. If
Mm.
you are not an operational employee who is facing customers, or who is stuck in a production line which would impact your production output units and stuff like that, if you're not in those roles, there should be flexibility. You should be able to kind of get out for some time, go finish your work and come in. And a lot of people are matured enough to fill in their time which is lost in between, or complete the task that they are supposed to do. Of course, there will be a small fraction of people who would probably take advantage of the system, but they would exist anyways. So can we come up with this kind of things? And third, third part to improve employee experience massively, what I feel is financial wellness,
Mm.
something which is very less focused by a lot of organizations. But if you can solve the financial problems of your employees, I think they will be highly engaged within an organization. So
True.
can you develop programs to help people invest the money they are making to create a more safe and secured future
Of
financially?
course.
You would automatically remove that worry from their head and they would be more engaged. I think these are some of the factors. There are a lot more, but I would just share these three at the moment.
Very good example. And I honestly I couldn't agree more. As you said, recognition, financial wellness, and flexibility, all. I would add here a fourth one, the talent density, are all
Very,
interconnected elements
very
to
important.
contribute, yeah, to a thriving workplace culture, by
Yes.
implementing these, as you said, recognition programs and promoting financial wellness and flexibility.
Yeah.
Companies and
Very
managers, especially line managers, have the power to create an environment that attracts top talent, that fosters engagement, and
true.
ultimately increases this talent density, leading to greater productivity and success for our companies. Now, going back to the framework that we discussed, would you say that there's any way that companies can audit their existing employee experience strategy, what they do, and how can they identify the areas where they can improve?
Audit, you mean to say audit the employee experience framework as such?
Yes, to let's say more specifically, check where they can improve, how they can, what are the areas where they can be better, because as you yourself has said,
Yeah.
employee experience is a very big space and there are
Yeah.
many ways on how we can improve it. You've
True.
mentioned the financial
Yes.
wellness, flexibility. These are different
Yeah.
areas. And
Yeah.
especially large enterprises, they can be great in some areas, but
Yeah.
performing not so good in others. So, how can
True.
they easily identify these areas and
Yeah.
improve there?
So Niran, to answer this question, I think we need to kind of come come out from that and let's say look at it from an outside perspective. Predominantly, there are probably four things that impact employee experience across any organization. Okay.
Hmm.
So the first thing are the EX drivers, and these EX drivers can be like further split into the cultural aspect, which we discussed previously. There is the environment, like the office setup where you're sitting. If it's office, if it's remote, how you are kind of placed. This is the second part, and the third is the tools that you are using, the
Hmm.
tools that are provided to you, how you interact with things. So these three things form the EX drivers. Then you have the employer branding part of it. Okay, so the employer branding is the second
Yes.
point. In the employer branding, how you attract talent from outside, and how you fulfill the promises that you have given through employee value proposition internally. This is
True.
point number two. Point number three is the design. How you envision your future state, and how
Hmm.
where you're currently. You should have a clear understanding of where you're currently and where you want to go. And here you need to use things like functionality, empathy maps, and things like that within this factor. And the fourth is listening and feedback, how you collect, continuously collect feedback and things. So if you look at these four aspects, they impact employee experience massively. So when
I
you say
agree.
audit, your employee experience framework, I would say we need to drill down into these four factors and start looking at each of the elements. So, for example, cultural aspect. If you want to audit the employee experience overall, you need to look at how the cultural aspect is impacting. It's
Hmm.
one thing to say that you are transparent, or you are an organization which promotes transparency, but is this transforming into actions? And if it is, what's the frame, or what's the time frame that you want to achieve this? I want to
Hmm.
make this organization a transparent organization, let's say in 5 years' time. Implement plans, communicate this with the employees, and then you audit these factors. Are you hitting the milestones here?
Hmm.
Because because employee experience is not something in vacuum, right? There are multiple factors which are contributing to it. And
Yes.
to audit an employee experience as a whole, you need to start auditing each of these things. Same with tools. If you are saying you have cutting edge tools, ask employees, are they happy with those tools? Because probably you would have a generation which is working, which is not so tech savvy, but you have
True.
implemented a very forward looking technology within your organization. While you can claim that you are technologically forward, but your employee experience is not forward because your people are not really, you know, have that skill gap in terms of adopting that
Yes.
technology, and vice versa. If you have, let's say, Gen Zs who are working within your organization, and you are using clunky ERPs where you don't even know where the click is, and you need to kind of, look into the screen to find those buttons, then you have lost the plot. So
True.
I would say we start auditing at the elements which contribute to the employee experience, and that's where you can probably look at how you can frame these things.
Yeah. Very, very good points. So we have tools, the branding, and the employee value proposition that we communicate to both our
Yes,
existing and new
yes,
employees.
yes,
We have the design and feedback, feedback, feedback. Timely,
yes,
constructive,
timely.
in a proper manner. Couldn't agree more. And I agree that there is this transformative potential of this, let's say, if I can say, digital employee experience across organizations.
True.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Shivdas, for tuning in to this enlightening discussion on internal communication
Most
and
welcome.
employee experience. We enjoyed having you as our guest. And remember, the key to fostering a thriving workplace lies in strategic communication and relentless focus on enhancing the employee journey. Stay
Yes.
tuned for more valuable insights on our upcoming episodes. Thank you.